Welcome to our War Week 8 activity. This week's topic is parentheses. Now, while there are a few pages in the APA manual, 159 to 60, that refer to the rules to use parentheses, there's no general rule. This one's also going to cover verb tense a little bit. So there is no APA style guide, but there is a APA style blog that you can refer to, and I would suggest reading through that. So we're just going to go through a couple of different style guides to show you some examples of when to use and not to use parentheses, because you want to use them properly in your writing. So here's some examples for statistics and using parentheses properly. So if you're going to report the mean and standard deviation, you wouldn't report it within the text. It's not a narrative way to report it. You would put it correctly at the end of the sentence within the parentheses separated by a comma. Here's another statistics correlation coefficient that's presented. And then here the p-value is also presented here within at the end of the sentence. And so it's offsetting those statistics. The sentence has mentioned it, and then you're offsetting it. However, when you're presenting an F value, your degrees of freedoms are already in parentheses, so you don't put that p-value in parentheses. If you're talking about it at the end of the sentence, you want to offset that p-value, you would put it in parentheses. Even like if you're talking about seeing a figure, that would be offset at the end of the sentence in parentheses. You're drawing the reader's attention to it. Here, because again, the degrees of freedom are already in parentheses, you just separate that p-value with a comma. Another time where you might be using parentheses is in a list, and there's a whole different war activity that we go over lists and how to properly list items in your writing. Again, I don't see you ever needing to use a bulleted list or an offset kind of paragraph formatted list. I think most of your lists will be within the context of a sentence. Here, if you want to make this list, you could do this list without letters, but if you wanted to make it the items kind of stand out a little bit, you want to use a lettered list, you would put those letters in parentheses. As you see here, the items are separated then by semicolons. When you're citing a reference, you will also be using parentheses. That year always goes in parentheses. Perhaps sometimes in different types of citations, other things might as well. You won't be referring to doctoral dissertations, so you won't have to worry about this the way these square brackets are presented here. But your parenthetical and your narrative citations will also be using parentheses. Note the parenthetical citation, the author's last name and the year are both in parentheses. This would go at the end of the sentence. Or if you're using that author's last name as part of the narrative of the sentence, you would then just put the year in parentheses. So I think I've pretty much covered all of the different parenthesis rules that are covered in the war activity. The only one I haven't covered is this abbreviation rule. So go back to that abbreviation war activity, I believe it was just last week, and see what would you do. Should these be in separate parentheses or should they be in the same parentheses? And if they're in the same parentheses, what do you do to separate that abbreviation from the citation? Hopefully you've learned something about using parentheses correctly with APA style.